Lia, how are you this morning?
Doing well. How is everybody else? You've got quite the crew on already.
Yeah, we should get quite a few. We usually get these are usually pretty well attended. And so um, what we do is, we kind of just chat and then we give opportunity to folks to type in questions in the chat. So they'll be able to type questions if they have a particular question. So we might get some of that. So let me just by way of introduction, I met you a couple of years ago at the U.S. Cattlemen's Association when I was asked to give a little talk there, and it was fun to do that and to meet some of the cattle producers. And are you still in Washington, D.C.? Is that where you're residing?
I am still in Washington, D.C., correct?
Okay. And so my understanding, just correct me if I'm wrong, but you kind of represent U.S. Cattlemen's interest in Washington. So you basically do some of the lobbying on behalf of that organization. Is that a fair characterization?
Perfect characterization. Yep, I am the registered federal lobbyist for the United States Cattlemen's Association. I also represent a few other groups, notably the Society for Range Management. I don't lobby on behalf of them because they are a nonprofit, but I do interact with the government on their behalf. So when we start talking about, how do cattle benefit the environment, both of those groups are key players in that discussion on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, I mean, in this audience, we're all a bunch of, pretty much diehard meat eaters and hopefully live hard meat eaters, I should say. But, so our interests are somewhat aligned. I mean, certainly we have a definite interest in making sure that we have access to, high quality nutrition. That is what the U.S. cattlemen do and for us. So tell us, how did you get into this in the first place? What made you decide to become a lobbyist for the Cattlemen's Association?
Sure, it's a bit off a roundabout way as I ended up in this spot. I'm from Metro Detroit, actually. I don't have an ag background. My family doesn't farm or ranch, but we are Italian and we do love our food. And if you're familiar with Italian cooking, it's a lot of clean, good, rustic stuff. So I got really involved in how food is produced. And, through that interest, I attended Michigan State University, where I kind of expanded my studies in environmental science and agriscience. And I'm a huge outdoors woman. And so also got involved in some of the conservation and natural resources space, and especially liked the policy arena. So ended up in Washington, D.C. immediately after graduation, working for the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation, some more hunting and fishing. But met my current boss kind of by happenstance and wanted to really get back to the food production realm. And so here I am as a lobbyist for the Cattlemen's Association and representing various other groups in that same arena. And it's incredibly, love my job, absolutely love my job and everything that we do here in Washington, D.C. It's such an incredibly fast moving career, and there's always things that are happening on Capitol Hill and things to connect with people in the countryside on. I'm a huge believer of problem solving, of connecting people with their policymakers to solve problems. And I think we'll touch on it more, but there's certainly some problems in the public perception space around livestock and meat production and consumption. So really excited to be here today and to talk with the carnivore community to get your thoughts and feedback. Hopefully, help me help you. If there's anything that you are seeing in your community, would love to know more about it, and just some good feedback from you all here too. I want this to be more of a discussion rather than me just chatting at you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the things that many of us, we're concerned about, is are we going to have access to meat over the long haul? Is it something that is it going to be priced out of, it's going to exclude people, but due to pricing? Are there restrictions that are going to happen? I mean, I know there's people that say that's never going to happen. I know I've talked to guys like Frank Midlaner, and he says, they're just talking. But then, you see some other signals coming from other places. You see obviously the climate change agenda, whether you support that or oppose that or whatever, but that is something that we're seeing in the schools telling kids, hey, stop eating meat. It's bad for the environment. Stop. We're seeing magazines, Epicurious magazine, no longer going to produce meat in their beef recipes. We're seeing New York restaurants, Michelin star restaurants saying we're no longer going to put meat on the menu. What's the reality of the situation?
That's a real concern. I want to introduce everybody to this term. It's called a social license to operate. And what this means, what the definition of this term means, is that a community or a group of people can essentially put an industry out of business simply because they don't want it to exist. So we can, you know, sit here and beat our drums and talk all day about facts and numbers and statistics, but at the end of the day, it's a real concern. And I saw in the comments already, you know, it's already happening out there, and it is. And Dr. Baker, you mentioned it. We're already seeing it with Epicurious Magazine. We're seeing it on Capitol Hill with the Green New Deal. We're seeing it kind of all over the place. And yeah, California is headed that way quickly. And so what can we do as supporters and advocates of the beef and meat industry? And I'm going to keep saying beef and cattle because it's just beaten into me at this point. But when I say that, I also mean pork, chicken, and every other different kinds of protein source that everybody's consuming here. But you know, you guys are the greatest supporters and advocates of this industry. And so how do we tell that story? How do we you know, earn our social license to operate? And I think that begins and ends with talking about the incredible story of beef, cattle, ruminant animals, grazing animals, and their impact on the environment. And this is something that you all have had so many great conversations with. I was scrolling through some past guests here, and I saw Deanna Rogers, I saw Jason Roundtree from Michigan State, I saw Gabe Brown, Peter Ballerstedt, a lot of these folks that are really well read and well studied on how cattle impact the environment. So I'd really encourage you, if you haven't already, to go back, listen to those interviews and learn something from them. And we're going to talk more about kind of the political and public perception and how we can engage there, because I am no scientist by any means, but I do operate in this communications and messaging field. It's, you know, kind of the main duty as a lobbyist is trying to get the message out there that beef and cattle deserve a place on the American plate, especially when it's US produced beef and cattle. You know, we're huge advocates of made in the USA, product of the USA, born, raised, and harvested in the USA. And that's because we do it best here in the United States. We raise cattle, we raise animals the most sustainably, the highest quality in the world. And so we need to capture that, and we need to really tell folks that supporting our domestic producers, supporting our domestic production chain is the most sustainable way to consume beef, to consume protein. And so I love seeing all the chats coming in here. So excited to get to the question and answer part 2.
What, you know, a lot of us are sitting there going, you know, we're watching some of this stuff, you know, we see there's a big media campaign, you know, there's a lot of money, you know, obviously these sort of alternate protein industries have a lot of funding behind them, and they've got a massive, I would call it even a disinformation campaign where they sort of unfairly trot out numbers which are either been disproven or are highly context dependent. You know, we see this with you know, we continue here that the biggest thing you could ever do to save the environment is stop eating meat. And you know, you look at the US EPA data, it's like that's not even close. You know, cattle are 2% of our EPA emissions, and that's not even including soil sequestration and what we could potentially do with some of these, you know, more holistic grazing plans. What can the average consumer do? And one of the, you know, one of my disappointments is, you know, and I know this maybe not from US Cattle, but NCBA, you know, I don't see the sort of the messaging to the extent that I think could happen publicly with advertising with, I mean, I remember beef, it's what's for dinner, but that was 1990s. I haven't seen any, I mean, maybe it was even earlier than I can't remember when that was, but it's been so long that it seems like there's not the pushback. Now, maybe it's behind the scenes in some of the legislative stuff. And I know we have, you know, we're seeing legislation being proposed in Oregon and in Colorado, the PAWS Act, a similar one in Oregon, where they're trying to outlaw animal husbandry and, you know, raise the slaughter age to, you know, 20 years or 5 years or whatever it's going to be. What is what do we see? What are we missing behind the scenes? What am I not seeing with some of the stuff that's going on?
I don't think you're missing much. We need to do a better job. And I've been beating this drum for a long time, but I've only been involved in this for not even quite 5 years now. So we need to do a better job of telling the story. Producers do, and consumers, really. I mean, again, you all here are incredible advocates of beef and meat. And so how do you tell that story? Well, from your perspective, it's a health and nutrition standpoint, right? You've started consuming this high protein diet. How is it benefiting you in your nutrition and health? Because we're seeing some of these activists, some of these vegan and vegetarian groups coming out and saying, well, you can get as much protein as you need from broccoli or quinoa. And that's just simply not true. You'd have to eat just an incredible amount to get the same amount of health and nutrition benefits as you could from a good cut of steak or a good ground beef patty. And so how do we as consumers of beef continue to tell that story? You have to remain positive. You have to be extremely inclusive. You have to welcome everybody into the fold. And it's not just a certain type of person that's consuming meat. We've got data that shows, it's a lot of different types of ethnicities, different types of demographics that are consuming meat on a regular basis and that are huge supporters of the industry. And so how do we tell that story that beef and meat fills a nutrition gap for many different groups across many different countries? On the producer side of things, we, and Dr. Baker, you just touched on it, through the beef checkoff program, each producer has to pay $1 into this marketing program each time a cattle is bought or sold. So $1 goes into this marketing campaign. The beef checkoff program collects somewhere around $50 to $60 million a year, and that money is distributed to several different contractors who then carry out projects on behalf of the program. And Beef is What's for Dinner is one of the results of those projects. There's also a lot of different research projects and some other campaigns to help increase beef demand. But what we're missing, I think, in that is we are missing getting the full benefit of our dollar by not telling the story of how producers interact with the environment and how cattle are an important part of the entire livestock and agriculture production system. Excuse me, my computer is going nuts right now. Let me put myself on mute here for a minute. And so what are you missing, Dr. Baker? I don't think you're missing anything. I think we as a collective group need to continue to just share images of beef and meat on social media, share images of you eating beef and meat. You see all of these vegan, vegetarian meals all over the place. I want to see more beef. I want to see more meat on my social media feeds. I want it to be normal again. I want it to be something that is not villainized or talked down on. I want it to be a normal part of dietary eating patterns, because even according to the USDA dietary guidelines, which we are not entirely in support of, there's still a lot of good that they could do, or a lot of room for improvement within the USDA dietary guidelines for Americans. They still recommend beef and meat as an important part of the diet, albeit lean beef and meat, but it's still there. And it was also included for the first time ever as an important part of dietary nutrition requirements for humans ages 0 through 2. So it's an important first food for babies. I've seen several different articles talking about, the ethics of feeding your baby a vegetarian diet. And I just couldn't imagine putting my own child at risk like that for any number of developmental issues as they, grow up and as their bodies grow. So it was really important to us to see USDA include that information, include that beef and meat are an important part of, in early foods for young Americans. And I guess I'm going to stop now because I want to hear a little bit more from you, Dr. Baker. What are you seeing out there? And folks on the call here, I'm looking at the chat. Again, would love to hear some more folks from folks on here.
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing, obviously, I've been sort of beating this drum about the nutritional aspects of meat for several years now, about 5 years. Certainly I've eaten it my whole life, but I've sort of, obviously, when you focus exclusively on that and you see what the difference is, and we have literally hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of just incredible life-altering health transformations. And I'm wondering if that message is getting to some of these politicians, some of these, people in the government that might need to understand that or be made aware of that. I'm wondering if there's a way to facilitate that, because we've got just tremendous, just incredible stories that I think people need to know about. And I'm doing the best I can. Like I said, I'm one guy. I'm not the U.S. government. I've gotten little to no resource. I'm just all based on my own sort of desire. Now we've got a community behind it that's growing, but So I wonder, is there a way to facilitate that with policymakers that might have an interest? I mean, I know there's certain, politicians, you go to, the governor of Nebraska, guys in, Kansas and Texas and stuff that produce, and as part of their economy, obviously they have a financial interest. But what surprised me is when I presented at U.S. Cattlemen's Association, I think it was 2018, many of the producers there didn't realize they were producing health food. I mean, they even bought into the, it's sort of a small amount of the stuff. It's going to, don't eat it too much, it'll kill you type of stuff. And so getting that message out to the other people, how do we sort of team up? Because I think, like I said, obviously we very much support and appreciate what the cattlemen do. And I think, letting them know that they're producing these wonderful health transformation also, I think is helpful. So I just wonder if there's further collaborative opportunities and how do we make that happen?
It's a great segue into diving into the political and policymaking process. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that are happening on Capitol Hill and how folks on this call here can help us, again, help the entire industry. But first, I want to do a little sound off in the chat. Let me know where you're from, and I'll let you know if it's an important part of the country, because I'm assuming most of us are from very important, influential parts of the country when we're talking about the federal government. And so, oh, wow, we even have some folks from outside of the US. Love to see it. But let's talk about some of the things that are happening on Capitol Hill right now. When we look at the US Department of Agriculture, the U.S. Cattlemen's Association submitted 2 petitions for rulemaking to USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service, USDA FSIS. What those petitions for rulemaking ask for is, number 1, to define the terms beef and meat, and to make sure that those definitions are that beef is from the flesh of a bovine animal that has been harvested in the traditional manner, and that meat is along the same lines. Why did we do that? It's because of this rise of cell-cultured protein. And if you don't know what this is yet, and it's literally, it's been blowing up over the past couple of years. Cell-cultured protein, or foods produced using cell-cultured technology, or petri dish protein, or lab-grown meat, whatever you want to call it. What these companies are doing and what these scientists are doing are taking cells from a real live cow. They take it from what's called the fetal bovine or fetal blood serum. So they take a little bit of blood and from the fetus of a cow, and they insert those cells into a petri dish. They grow it in kind of a mixture of hormones and cytokines and just this medium that these cells sit in and marinate while they grow. And what they do is they grow outwards only about 3 millimeters thick. So you've got this incredibly thin slice of muscles in a petri dish. And these companies are trying to mass produce those cells to imitate traditional meat cuts. So for ground beef, you might imagine this is going to be relatively easy. You can take a lot of those thin slices and just kind of mix them together, and here you go, you've got your cell-cultured foods. For things like muscle cuts, it's going to be incredibly more difficult because you've got to mimic fat, you've got to mimic ligaments, you've got to mimic just the traditional thick cut of meat that we all know and love. And our concern is that if these companies are allowed to use the terms beef or meat, that it's going to be very misleading for consumers, because it's not really beef or meat. It's beef or meat produced using cell culture technology. We already have examples of this. We have imitation crab. We have imitation vanilla extract. And if a consumer wants these products, they are available. You know, I prefer real vanilla extract in my baking because it makes such a great difference. Imitation vanilla, you just can't get the same effect. And I think we're going to see something similar when we're talking about imitation meat. So we submitted this petition for rulemaking in 2018. We have not heard back from USDA on it. We do know that USDA is talking to the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, and they have formed a couple working groups to address the regulation of cell cultured foods. There's not too many companies in this arena. It's a relatively small arena, and for that fact, they're very secretive about how they produce these products. They consider it, secret, what's the word? It's IP. It's
Yeah,
considered
intellectual property. Yeah.
intellectual property. It's considered intellectual property. And so they're not sharing how they produce these products with even the government, let alone the public. So we just don't know, what growth mediums they are using, what they're going to use to build this scaffolding to get true muscle cuts. You have to have these cells grow on something. Is it a petri dish or is it something consumable? What is that scaffolding protein going to be? And again, we just don't believe from the U.S. cattlemen's perspective that these products deserve the terms beef and meat, that those should be reserved exclusively for wholesome, natural, meat that's been derived from an animal harvested in the traditional manner, not this way. So there will be an opportunity for folks like you and me to weigh in on that decision when it comes up. And that is going to come up hopefully this year. It was on the spring 2021 regulatory agenda, which means that the USDA is considering bringing it up. And once they do, there will be a public comment period for 60 or 90 days. And you bet Dr. Baker is going to be sharing this public comment period far and wide, because we need folks who are on this call here to say that these terms should be reserved exclusively for meat and beef. We do have regulations labeling regulations sticking with the USDA. However, the initial manufacturing of these foods will be with FDA, and FDA historically has not been really friendly to the animal industry. If you might remember imitation milk, if you've got almond milk, oat milk, these things should not be called milk. It's almond juice, it's oat juice, but the FDA allows it, and we have those rules on the books. It's just that the FDA is not enforcing their own regulations. So that is an opportunity to weigh in on the political process, is through the public comment protocol there. The other petition that we have in front of USDA right now is Product of the USA petition. And I'm sure Dr. Miller, when he was interviewed with you, Dr. Baker, I'm sure he talked about this. But right now, the way that the regulations work, there's truly no way for you to know if unless you're buying direct. If you're buying direct from your producer, you know that meat was born, raised, and harvested in the US. But if you're buying it at the grocery store and it says Product of the USA, it's likely that it's an imported product, probably from South America, which is a leaner beef. They bring it over here, they mix it with our fatter beef, and then they can use that Product of the USA labeling, because in 2015, Congress repealed mandatory country of origin labeling and left no really, truthful or honest labeling regulations on the books. So that's disappointing. We did submit a similar petition for rulemaking to ask USDA to fix that loophole, to close that loophole down. And so there'll also be another opportunity for comment there. And, you might be thinking, well, I don't care about that. But having this made in the USA product helps US producers. And in turn, that decreases the cost of beef and meat for you, because these producers can stay in business and compete successfully with other producers and compete with processors. And so it's all part of the meat and beef community here. We've got to be supporting each other. We've got to be strong advocates for cattle. We've got to be strong advocates for beef, for other animals. And so these are the two opportunities within the administration, within the regulatory side of things, that you can comment. And we can talk about what's happening in Capitol Hill too, because it's a mess out there. But I just want to pause. I'm seeing a lot of great comments here. So take us to our next question here, Dr. Baker.
There's people asking about, obviously the public comments, they have USDA. I know Tom Vilsack got reappointed as Secretary of Agriculture. I think he just took over from Sonny Perdue. He was the previous one. What is his, is he pro-meat, anti-meat? Where does he fall currently? I'm just wondering.
Absolutely. So Secretary Vilsack actually worked with the Dairy Export Council before or in between his two Secretary of Agriculture stints. And so he's a proponent of animal agriculture. He always has been. His big thing is that he needs collaboration between within the industry on some of these issues. So for country of origin labeling, for example, which is one of our big fights, the U.S. Cattlemen's Association, our sister organization, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, does not support mandatory country of origin labeling. And so that's where a lot of our conflict comes. That's why we can't quite get country of origin labeling back. It's because we've got a lot of division within the industry, but what we need is consumers to step in and say, yes, this information is important to me. Yes, I want to know where my meat or beef or food comes from. And yes, we need that labeling to be truthful, transparent, and honest. So Secretary Vilsack, I know in the last administration kind of held back a little bit because he wanted to see the industry get more coordination within itself, but that's just not going to happen. There's hard lines drawn in the sand. And so I think in this next 4 years, he's going to have to make some really tough decisions and take sides. The rest of the people around him, we're seeing a lot of environmental type folks being appointed to high positions within USDA. And that's just because of the increasing spotlight on climate change and, you know, all of these other things that we're seeing. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. But I know that Secretary Vilsack is a huge proponent of animal ag, and that, you know, if given the opportunity, is going to make the right choice when these tough choices come by.
Yeah, I guess one of the things, and I've seen this, I mean, there does seem to be almost an adversarial relationship, unfortunately, between the producers and the packers. And the packers, I guess NCBA tends to maybe represent their interests more so than the actual producers. I think that's perhaps a fair comment. You know, and I'm just wondering, as a producer, and you're giving this money, this beef checkoff money, to NCBA, who may not have your interests represented. Is there any push to say, hey, maybe our interests are better served elsewhere? Maybe, I don't know. Is there any sort of guts for that within the cattle community? I mean, obviously there's 700,000 individual ranchers in the U.S., and so it's a big. Obviously, not everybody's going to be on the same page. But do you see any kind of, I don't know, perhaps changing goals with those groups?
Yeah, I sure hope we can find some agreement on these things within the beef checkoff program. You know, we at USDA are incredibly supportive of it because it has been shown to increase beef demand. It is a way to showcase beef and cattle and the sustainability efforts within the industry. But we also believe that more people need to be paying into it. Packers should be paying into it. We should have more contractors available. You know, it shouldn't be that the National Cattlemen's Beef Association receives the majority of the funds. And so USDA, we actually submitted and were successful in receiving some checkoff dollars a few years back to do some research on meat demand. And we do a monthly consumer survey of 1,500, actually 3,000 individuals each month on what they ate in the prior day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, what their willingness to buy beef, pork, chicken, and plant-based foods are at certain prices. And we're finding that beef demand is remaining very strong, and that plant-based food demand is not as strong as the media might make it out to be. So that's important work, and we are attempting to kind of level the playing field within the checkoff by becoming checkoff contractors ourselves, and, you know, competing for some of those funds by proposing projects that are really going to make a difference. And so, you know, how can we better leverage those dollars? I think it's just by increasing the number of people who can compete for those dollars, by suggesting projects that are really going to make an impact. What if we, you know, got a commercial during the Super Bowl, or what if, you know, we were up on New York Times or, you know, Times Square, New York City, sorry. Some of the more innovative things that are happening. I'm trying to think of a certain industry that's been doing a good job of advocating. I know I've been seeing the avocado checkoff doing a lot of work, but those are Mexican avocados. They're not even US avocados. So again, we've got a great story to tell as US beef producers. It's just, how do we leverage our main funding mechanism here, our main marketing program.
Yeah, I've got ideas on marketing, but, you know, if one of those days, because I've had some things I think would be interesting. But let me ask you about, you know, you know, I mean, that's great, the Super Bowl and all that stuff. You know, we've got social media, but this one thing you made this point about, you know, the perception. The media has a perception. You know, everybody, you know, but when you actually talk to your friends and neighbors, it doesn't seem to jibe with what we're being told. And so it seems like we have these, obviously we have these crazy, ridiculous laws being proposed on the ballot for, they're basically, can they get enough support, to put it on the ballot, and get enough signatures. I'm just wondering, we've got things like Meatless Monday in New York City. Bill de Blasio passed it for the entire New York City public school district. Are we not able to say, let's propose legislation that says this is not illegal, or let's propose laws, you could go, veganism for children is not acceptable. I mean, I see us playing a lot of defense, it's defense. And I think there should be some offense going on there where you're saying like, we don't want meatless Mondays. We don't want this being, on the books type of thing. And so I don't know if there's any appetite to actually play a little more aggressively, which is something that I think needs to be done, quite honestly.
Absolutely. No, I agree with you 100%. We have been playing defense for so long. I think we kind of forgot that we need an offensive line. And so how do we get back to that point where we're, educating folks, where we're in schools? I remember when I was in school, I was getting magazines about, wildlife and fuzzy important things that make you feel good. Why can't we do that in the beef industry? Why can't I remember getting a magazine about how good beef is for your health? And so how do we get back on the defense? I like your idea of policy. Because make no mistake, some of these rules and regulations that we're seeing being proposed, you mentioned the PAWS Act in Colorado, these are being brought forth by these activist groups because they don't want humans to have any interaction with animals. They don't want to consume them. They don't want you to keep them as pets. They don't want them in zoos. They want there to be a clear line in the sand between humans and animals. And that starts with these little rules that they propose that are going to add up to big things one day. That's kind of their playbook. They take things one step at a time, and eventually we'll look around and all of a sudden beef and meat is going to be incredibly difficult to find. So how do we combat that? I think it's, again, I can't stress this enough, telling your side of the story, because we as humans were meant to eat meat. We have the physiological structure for it. It's not something that we can ignore, and it's not something that's harming the planet either. You mentioned what's the media's perception of this. I think right now everyone's really excited about plant-based protein because it's new. It's being funded by a lot of billions and millions of dollars. It's flashy, but I think once folks start consuming it, because nobody is really consuming these proteins regularly, I think it's something like less than 5% of the population is vegan or vegetarian. It's not as big of an impact as the media is making it out to seem. I think we need to start getting ahead and making the story more about how grazing animals can benefit the environment. And one of those things that we're trying to do within the Society for Range Management is designate a United Nations International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralists to help tell that story. We actually are in the ending stages of getting that designation for 2026, so 5 years from now. But it's been a heck of a fight even to get there. And what we hope will happen with this International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralists is that we will have a greater global platform to talk about the role of livestock and to talk about the role of producers and ranchers and the livelihoods that this industry supports across the world. I know we've seen a lot of misinformation coming out from the United Nations, especially within the Food and Agriculture Organization, especially from organizations like the World Health Organization. And so we're hoping that this United Nations International Year designation is going to help combat some of that information. It'll be a full year supported by the United Nations, supported by I can't quite remember how many different countries we have supporting, but we have quite a few countries that are supportive of this effort. So you'll see more information about this international year start coming out towards the end of the year when they go to vote on it. And I think it's going to be July and October. So it's going to move this year. We're either going to have this international year designation or we won't. But I'm really excited about it because it's going to provide a global platform to talk about this. So hopefully we can get on the offense. But again, it's in 5 years. What is our industry going to look like in 5 years? I don't know. I really, truly hope and believe that beef and meat are still an important part of the diet, but so much has happened in the past 5 years in terms of these rise of cell cultured foods. I mean, who would have thought that they'd be trying to make meat in a laboratory? So I don't quite know what the industry is going to look like, but I know if we continue to tell our side of the story, if we continue to be involved in the policy process, if we continue to be involved in the regulation setting process, that we're going to have an impact. Dr. Baker, you said a moment ago, I'm only one guy, I'm only one gal, but collectively we have such a strong voice. And I know there's so many folks in this community. And if members of Congress, if politicians, if elected officials heard that voice, man, we could really make something happen.
Yeah, and I guess the question is how to get them to hear the voice, because like I said, you obviously have more access to the average number of politicians, I assume, or policymakers than I do. I mean, and just by your proximity to where it's going down. So again, once again, how do we actually get them to hear our story? What do we got to do? I mean, do we, I know there's some documentaries coming out. There's, obviously we're on social media, kind of some of us more vocal than others, but what else can we do?
Social media is a great starting point. Documentaries, I've seen so many great ones coming out this year. And I'm talking strictly from a US standpoint, so I apologize to our friends from Germany and Canada who are listening in today. But from a US standpoint, your members of Congress need to hear from you. If you haven't already heard this spiel, this is how it works. When you call, when you write, when you email your member of Congress, every time that you do that, and every time that you mention something that's important to you, it gets tallied up in the office. So they have all these interns answering the phone, answering emails, answering written letters, and they take whatever issue that constituent is talking about and they tally it up. So let's say country of origin labeling, and they had 10 or 12 constituents call about country of origin labeling that week. That information is passed along to the senator or the member of Congress, and there's a decision made. Do we have enough constituents talking about this? Is this something that the member of Congress or the legislator needs to address? And most of the time, even with that small of a number, it is, because you are a voting constituent. His or her job security depends on your vote. And so they're going to listen to you when you make that phone call, when you make that email. You might not think that you made a difference because, again, there's interns answering the phones. There's just too many phone calls every day for a staff member or for the member to actually be answering the phones. So you might feel like your message didn't get across, but it did, because you are being counted and tallied in that vote. And at the end of the week, when that office goes back and says, what issues are important to our constituents this week, they're going to see that most of their constituents are against the PAWS Act. They're going to see that most of their constituents are against the dietary guidelines that just came out. They're going to see that most of them support country of origin labeling, support made in the USA beef and meat. Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa, actually, and I think I saw a few Iowa folks on, recently introduced a bill that it's called the Tasty Act, or Telling Agencies to Stop Tweaking What Employees Eat Act of 2021. And it's incredibly straightforward. It just says it would prohibit federal agencies from establishing policies that ban serving any agricultural product like meat, for example. So we're seeing within USDA, sometimes the cafeteria will put up a Meatless Monday poster, or recommend not eating meat on Monday. And so Joni Ernst's piece of legislation would prevent that from happening. So you've got to call your member of Congress and say, hey, I support this bill from Senator Joni Ernst, and I think you should too. And that sort of conversation, that sort of relationship that you establish with your member of Congress or with your elected officials, a lot of these things are happening at the local level. The PAWS Act, for instance, that's only happening in Colorado. So if you are from Colorado, you need to be reaching out to your state legislators and telling them that you are concerned about the PAWS initiative. You are concerned about some of the things that the governor is saying about the beef industry in Colorado. Because again, you are only one voice, but collectively, when it's all of us making these calls, making these emails, it's a much bigger impact. So that is my recommendation to you on how you can make an individual difference, within even your own community or state.
How effective is a social media campaign outside of the tradition? Because, writing letters, no one writes letters anymore, or at least, I mean, if you do, it's out of sort of, maybe being romanticizing days gone by. But, like social media, you can get on there, you can tag the governor, the state rep, and you can maybe influence 100 people to also do that. Is that an effective strategy as well, or is it really calling the intern that's going to get more traction?
I'm smiling and laughing because my friends who are in the communications role in some of these members' offices are going to hate me for saying this, but yes, it is effective because they're seeing all of these comments coming in, they're seeing all these tags and mentions coming in, and that is also reported to the member of Congress. Like, hey, a lot of people are talking about this. You need to get up and address this somehow. So I would suggest using social media. It's a great tool, and it's for good reason. I think. I'm thinking back to our Yes to Meat campaign, Dr. Baker, and I think that really got a lot of traction. And I can't remember the statistics on it, but it was a blowout event. And those sort of things make a difference and build this community of supporters and build this community of advocates. And so when other people see, and not just members of Congress, but when the public sees that there are a lot of people behind something, I think it matters. I think it matters to combat some of the things that the media is saying. I think it matters to combat some of the things that Congress is saying. And, we're all supporters of beef and meat. So we need to be telling that. We need to not keep it to ourselves. We need to shout it from the rooftops because people need to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that, only a small percentage of the population is actually plant-based, where, fully plant-based, where there's vegan, vegetarian, and that trend has been the same for decades. It really hasn't grown. But what we are seeing is, these sort of alternate proteins, faux meat, whatever you want to call it, plant burgers or whatever. Their demographic is still the omnivore, the meat eater. And they're trying to siphon off 10-20% of their consumption. So that's a huge potential market. I mean, we're looking into the hundreds of billions of dollars, if they do that. And so one of the things that I mean, I think most people, 90 or 95% of the people, still eat meat, still enjoy meat, still appreciate that. And how do we get those guys to, just let people know, hey, I'm still interested in having meat on my plate as an option. And for me, it's on my plate every day, every meal. It's something that, when I see there was a recent survey I was looking at, I said two of them came out, one in Australia, one in Great Britain. It was asking, he said, men, 2/3 of men would rather die 10 years earlier than give up meat or give up beef. And, that's, it's sort of, one of it is they try to sort of, I guess, conflate eating meat with toxic masculinity or some other ridiculous argument that they tend to make when, women benefit just as much from meat as men do. And there's no reason to sort of have that dichotomy. But do you see, like I said, a way to sort of get the real information out there? Can we do something with the beef industry and said, hey, look, 9 out of 10 people still want to eat meat or something like that? So that there's something called there's a psychology experiment called the Ash experiment. And if you're told that everyone's perception is X, then your likelihood of sort of converting that is high. And if we all stand united and say, hey, we still want meat, we still enjoy meat, you get that information, then more of the public will tend to sort of go that way. It's kind of like they follow the crowd. And when they're being told the crowd is giving up meat in droves, some people do it just because they've got this herd-like mentality, and they're not actually critically thinking. So how do we get the average person, and how do we get that information out? Do you have any ideas on that?
No, and especially this next generation of consumers, Generation Z. I have a younger sister who's kind of in that age group, and so I'm kind of watching her grow up and learn about the world that way. And they are really susceptible to that peer pressure, especially through social media. If they see that everybody's giving up meat, or if they even hear it. I mean, I don't know how you're going to see it on social media, but hearing it over and over and over from all of these news reports is having an impact. And the animal rights activists, the environmental rights activists, they know this. And so they're keeping that voice strong. And so we need to also be keeping that voice strong. But for the average consumer, there's always going to be, in any policy arena on any issue, there's going to be a middle group of people who just don't care. They do not care about policy. They do not care about government. They want to just live their lives and not worry about anything. That's not anybody on this call here today, because you wouldn't be spending an hour of your day learning about something if you weren't kind of in that upper echelon of people who are just natural leaders. You naturally want to influence other people. And I think this group here today needs to really take that to heart and go out there and be an advocate, because you are going to influence the average consumer, but you might not hear from them. So again, don't get discouraged, don't get distracted when you are not getting feedback or response. It's building up over and over and over. It's the same thing that, the same thing that the news does. It just keeps repeating some of the same talking points, some of the same themes. And so folks are thinking that this is the truth. If we do that on our end and we are actually speaking the truth, think about the impact that that's going to have. I love Phil. He's mentioned billboards several times. I love that idea. I would love to see steak or cattle up on a billboard. I think actually in Colorado, the Colorado cattle women did a great billboard talking about synthetic beef versus real beef. And I'm excited to see how their campaign turns out. But there's a lot of questions in the chat here too, and I would love to stick around and answer some of them. I'll jump on your YouTube channel, Dr. Baker, and interact in the comments there. It's, I'm staying connected through social media. I got to practice what I preach here. And I think what I do and what you all do really does reach that average consumer. Even on social media, there's people who just kind of lurk and watch things happen and scroll their timelines. And there's people who influence and produce content. And the content that they produce is consumed by those people who aren't doing much. So those people in the middle, you might not think you're impacting them. They might be quiet, but I think it does have an impact. And when the going gets tough and those people have to do something like vote on an initiative, something that's not public, something that's incredibly private, like the Pause Act in Colorado, when they go to the ballot box, that's how we get their vote to continue to support us, is by being active in our spaces and providing them with the resources that they need to get the facts out there, so that, if somebody is questioned about why they support the ag industry or why they support eating beef or meat, that they have the facts and the figures that they need to provide an answer. And so that's our role as the beef and meat eating industry and community, is to provide those people who aren't naturally inclined to get involved in things with the information that they need to support their decision to support beef or meat. So I think that's where I'm at with how do we reach the average consumer. You might not hear from them. It might even be the same thing as members of Congress. It might feel like you're just screaming into the wind, but it is making a difference. It is making an impact. And slowly over time, this is a process, it's going to make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple comments I've had, there was a recent, and this was unfairly, they was talking about the new political administration's climate goals, and somebody attributed it, well, that's going to mean we have to give up 90% of our meat. They haven't said that, but the nice thing about that, even though it wasn't accurate, is so many people push back against that. You can see how many people are angry about the prospect of cutting back on meat significantly, and I say don't give an inch. And personally, I know you talk about the slowly boiling frog, where they just kind of they propose outrageous things and they take just a little bit, and they do that over and over again until it happens. And so the one sad thing I see is it's become very politicized. And so we hope we don't have the, just because I vote a certain way, I'm not going to eat meat. I'm going to eat meat because that's 50% of the population. So it's a big problem. The other thing that I think is important is that, with messaging, one of the things that the sort of people that are anti-meat, the animal activists and stuff, they've got some very effective, very short, just images or even, one sentence memes that, and I think we have to have the counter message. The fact that most people don't understand that, in the United States, cattle produce 2% of our greenhouse gases. I mean, that is a basic fact that everybody should know and have in there. I'm not even sure if there's politicians that even are aware of that. And so that's something that, that information, there's a nice study out of Duke, Stefan Van Vliet did, that showed that beef has 50,000 unique individual compounds, chemical compounds that have nutritional impacts. When you compare that to the plant burgers, they only share about 10% in common. And so these sort of basic facts, that beef is more than just some protein and some fat and a few vitamins. It's a very diverse, complex, entity that can't be replicated in either a lab or with, grinding up, pea protein and sticking some canola oil in there. So I think those are a couple things that, the sort of the, to try to avoid the politicization of it and, getting some of these basic facts out there in a bigger way so that every American understands the actual impact of their eating, beef in the United States, it's something that Frank Mitloehner and has talked about. I've talked about this for years. And like I said, it's something that I don't know if we can spend some money on educating people, commercials, how to get that to happen. I think it's an important role.
I think that's great feedback. And Dr. Baker, love hearing you talk about the health benefits of it, because that's not my area of expertise. But yeah, no, I think that's great feedback. It's really hard to distill what we do into a meme. And I think that's been the huge challenge, but it's definitely doable, and something that we need to tackle as an industry and as advocates of beef and meat. We need to be out there making these easy to consume, easy digestible memes and other formats that this next generation really appreciates, like TikToks. I think TikToks can only be 15 seconds. How do you get all of this that we've talked about into 15 seconds? It is a challenge, but we're ready for it. And I think that's the next step, is to start pushing out more information that's much easier to digest, much easier to share, much easier to mimic and copy. And so, yeah, good feedback there, and something that we'll definitely be taking into consideration in the next few years.
Yeah, the other thing, we talk about TikTok and the younger generation, a lot of adult dietary patterns are laid down in teenage years and young adulthood. And so you kind of stick with that the rest of your life. And so I think the people that understand that, they go after the kids very early. And one way they do that is through celebrities and other influencers. And I think one of the opportunities that I'd like to see, I've seen a very little amount of this, but different, either beef industry in general, maybe some of the major players or even individuals should support, maybe, and consider sponsoring some of these athletes. But I've got like professional fighters, professional football players that are on an all beef diet, and they're doing great. And, I can think of people just by name that, if we get people to sponsor them so they can reach more of these kids. We've got some of the top athletes in the world that are now opting for a fully meat-based diet. And I think that's an opportunity that, has the chance to impact, many children, which I think is, again, this is when we're looking at the future, I'm not so concerned about my choice. I'm going to eat meat regardless, but my kids and their kids, down the road are going to be looking at a situation where maybe they only have limited options when it comes to that.
Absolutely. I mean, Kanye West just bought a ranch in Wyoming with cattle on it. So how do we use him to help tell that story? Or how do we use some of these celebrities? I know Diana Rodgers got Nick Offerman to narrate Sacred Cow. That's a good celebrity get. But Dr. Baker, you know where to find me, and beef checkoff proposals are due within a month. So I would love to do some sort of joint collaboration here where we can reach out to some of those influencers, those athletes that and get them to publicly talk about their beef and meat consumption. I know right now the Beef Checkoff program currently sponsors, I can't quite remember his name, but he's on that Ninja Warrior show. And he's been a great athlete. And
Is it Lance Perkins or something like that?
Lance Perkins, yes, Lance Perkins. But I'm not sure if we've really delved into traditional sports and traditional sport leagues. And
well, there's an NFL Super Bowl champion that's on an all meat diet that I think you could do. There's several MMA professional fighters. There's in the US, there are people out there. So we should look at that. Lia, unfortunately, I have to run. I only had an hour this morning. This has been great. We should do this again. I honestly think maybe maybe not with this sort of thing, but maybe monthly or something like that, we can have like a social media pushback on some issue, whether it's Pause Act in Colorado, or reinstating MCOOL, or opposing 30-30, or what. There's different issues out there, and I think people that know it and figure out a way to either tag people on social media or directly contact our local representatives to kind of become a united force. And I'm happy to do that, obviously, and whatever little influence I have. But I mean, it can be augmented and multiplied by everybody getting on board. I'm sure most of the people in the community will be willing to help that. And I think as a group, we're actually probably have enough influence over quite even millions of people at this point. So it's something that's important. So anyway, all right, Leah, tell us where we can find out more about you. I want to make sure you get that information. If people want to contact you directly or figure out what they can do more in a more personal way, let us know.
Yes, come find me on social media. I am quite active on Twitter at Biondo Lia. I put it in the chat here. I'm on Instagram too, but you're going to have to just follow along with my personal stuff on Instagram. I tend to do more of my political and policy making presence on Twitter. So follow me there. I can also drop my email and phone in here. I would love to hear your ideas about some beef chuck-off projects that we should be doing. Was it Phil, let's talk about your billboard plan. But yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Baker, for having me on today, and looking forward to staying in touch.
Yeah, let's do it again sometime, Leah. Thank you so much, and thanks for what you do. Appreciate it. And tell all the ranchers that we love them, and we, if they don't know that, they should know that.
Sounds great. Well, thank you.
Okay, guys, got to go. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Take care, everybody. Bye now.